Possible types of risks. For the RMP exam, it is good to know all possible types of risks which are listed below, and we will go through them. These are types of risks, not categories or classification of risks. And this is by no means exhaustive. There can be also other possible types of risks. So first, individual project risk. This is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more objectives of the project. Overall project risk. This is a risk that has an effect of uncertainty on the project as a whole. Then positive risk, also known as opportunity, a risk that would have a positive effect on one or more objectives. Negative risk, a risk that would have a negative effect on one or more project objectives. Known risks, this is also called as identified risk. It is simply a risk that is identified. Unknown risk or unidentified risk, this is a risk that is not identified. Secondary risk, a risk that occurs because you took a risk response on a primary risk. So you took a response on a risk, this in turn created a new risk, and that will be called as secondary risk. Emergent risk, this is a risk arising that could not have been identified earlier. Then you have residual risk, a risk that remains after you have taken a risk response. So you took a response on a risk, but still some of the risk is remaining, and that will be called as residual risk. Outdated risk, a risk that didn't occur, either based on an event or condition. Correlated risk, a risk that is correlated to one or more other risks. Connected risk, a risk that is connected to one or more other risks. Then undifferentiated risk, this is also called as unqualified risk, a risk that is not qualified or has not been qualified. Then you have differentiated risk or qualified risk, this is a risk that has been qualified. Quantified risk, a risk that has been quantified, usually in terms of time and or money. Then aggregated risk, risks that are aggregated with one or more risks and pose a bigger threat or a bigger opportunity. Then event-based risks, a risk that occurs based on an event. Variability risk, these are risks arising out of uncertainties about certain key characteristics of a planned event or activity or decision. This is a non-event risk. Ambiguity risk, these are risks arising out of uncertainties that exist about what might happen in the future. This is also a non-event risk. Now what is non-event risk overall? It is a risk that occurs but not based on event. For example, variability risk, ambiguity risk. And related to that, this emergent risk, known risks, etc. I have a tip which is telling you can read more about known unknown, unknown unknowns in this article, and this is the link. Next is prioritized risk or high priority risk, a risk that has been prioritized based on risk score, which crosses the risk threshold. Then you have low priority risk, a risk that has been prioritized based on the risk score, which is below the threshold. This low priority risk will be part of a list, and that list is called as watch list. Then you have another risk that is called enterprise risk. This is also called as business risk. This is a risk of an enterprise or applicable to the entire enterprise or the organization.